Okay, here we go. It's chapter 27 of The Night Singer. 27. It was with a certain sense of reluctance that Eric left Fanny's house. He was convinced she was lying about both not hitting Joel in the hash, and given the state she had been in, thought they had grounds to run a drug test on her at the very least. That way they could use the results to make her talk. But Hannah seemed to be in a hurry to get away. After holding out a card that Fanny refused to take, she had put it on the ground and turned back toward the car. Eric had felt like he had no choice but to follow her. The call that had come through on the drive over had clearly unsettled her, though maybe that wasn't what the hurry was about at all. They now knew that Joel had met 3 people in the woods on the night he died. Perhaps Hannah simply thought that talking to the others would be more fruitful. Eric closed the car door, ready to discuss it with her, but she had already pulled out her phone and was busy writing a message. With one last glance out at Fanny, he started the engine and drove away. The girl didn't even look up. "Could you drop me off at Rebecca Forslund's?" Hannah asked him. Was she really planning to hang out with the victim's mother right now? They had to follow up on what Fanny had told them, though maybe it was Rebecca who had called in a hysterical state. Eric thought he had heard a scream, but in that case, Hannah should have said something. No, he was pretty sure that it had been a new threatening phone call. Why? She wants to see where Joel was found, and I think it could be good to get some more photos out there today. Plus, she might be able to tell me more about him. Not a word about their relationship, nor the call she had received. Sure, I can call Lucas and Tilde to see whether their version of what happened matches Fanny's. I'll talk to Amber about the hash too. He can check with the youth team to see what they know about Fanny Borg. Eric pulled up outside the Forslunds' house. For a moment he considered offering Hannah the car, but he wasn't particularly eager to catch the bus back to Kalmar, especially not now that she had dumped all this work on him, no matter how bad he felt for her. It was his turn to pick Nalia up today, which made it even more important that he got back to the station in good time. Call the teacher Iska Ulin too, Eric nodded. Hannah had been cooler since he had asked about her father, but he could deal with that. What he didn't like was that she wasn't being completely open with him, admitting that the visit to Rebecca's was also about their friendship, or telling him about the new threatening call he suspected she had received. Anything else? Hannah shook her head and climbed out. Eric set off for the station. He had spent much more time driving in Kalmar than he had in Malmö. The area was bigger and much less densely populated, and it was always more enjoyable when there was someone else to talk to. Today, he used the time to think about what he was going to make for dinner. The simplest thing would be to take Nyla to the supermarket and let her choose. Suggest pizza or pasta or something else they wouldn't have for a while since his mother-in-law took over the kitchen. When he got back to Kalmar, Eric headed straight to the cafeteria to grab a piece of fruit. All the thinking about food had made his stomach rumble. He polished off his apple in a few quick bites and then went up to the office. Amar had the standing desk opposite his. Did something happen? He asked Eric. What do you mean? You look so gloomy. I'm just tired, Eric told him. He didn't want to air his irritation about Hannah, the fact that he thought she was making strange decisions. Amar studied him for a moment, clearly not buying Eric's explanation. Have you got the names of any dealers? Eric asked. 10 or so. Why? Is Fanny Broomberg one of them? Nope. Could you ask the youth team if they've got anything on her? Sure. Eric checked his emails and then settled down to make some calls. Lucas first, followed by Tilde, but he struggled to get either of them to say much. That was one of the limitations of phone calls. In the end, they both confirmed Fanny's version of events. They had met Joel behind the school at midnight, and they had just talked no violence. After roughly 15 minutes, Joel had left. They claimed not to know anything about the dispute between Joel and Fanny. They had gone along purely because she asked them to. Eric gave them his spiel about how dangerous it was to lie to the police, particularly during a murder investigation, and Tilde seemed noticeably stressed, but she stuck to her original statement. Eric had been hoping for the smallest of openings at the very least, something he could use to pry their stories apart, but even without that, it felt like the investigation had taken a big step forward. Joel had voluntarily left the house to meet Fanny at midnight, and just a few hours later he was dead. Were Fanny and her minions the last people to see him alive? Depending on what happened in the case, they could put more pressure on the 3 teenagers tomorrow. Ove came over to talk to him. "Could you come with me a moment?" Eric logged out and followed him. "First, I just wanted to let you know that we've got Axel Sanson on CCTV leaving his office at 2:15 on Wednesday morning." Ove seemed relieved that Axel couldn't have murdered Joel. Eric felt the same. He always struggled to deal with parents who hurt their own children. The hardest investigation he had ever worked on involved a 2-year-old who had been beaten to death by his father. The fact that a child had died was obviously the worst part, but the way the father had talked about it, claiming the little boy was so difficult that he just couldn't help himself, was also awful, as though it were the child's fault somehow. Axel seemed like the type who resorted to using his fists whenever he lost control. The idea that he had hired someone to kill Joel didn't feel particularly likely. How has Hannah Dunker been today?" Ove asked. So that was what he really wanted to talk about. Eric had no idea what to say because he wasn't quite sure what he thought. The frustration he had felt earlier had softened slightly, though he knew this might also be his chance to mention that someone had been making harassing phone calls to her. "Good," he said eventually. "I suppose you could say that she and I have history," Ove continued. "So I want to make sure she settles into the group." "She's a good officer," said Eric. "Maybe not the most talkative, but that doesn't really matter." Ove smiled. If Eric was honest, it was only really him that Hannah seemed to clam up around. She hadn't had any trouble talking to anyone else they had met all day. She had actually been fairly personal with several of them. To an extent, he had only himself to blame. Eric knew he could be a bit much at times. It was perfectly possible to manage the job without being friends with your colleagues, but he didn't like working that way. "No, I see that," said Ove. "Her father—" "Surely it doesn't matter what your dad did," Eric interrupted him. "So you know about it?" "Yes." Eric studied Ove, trying to work out what he was getting at. "It left a real wound when it happened," said Ove, "and there are a lot of people who still remember that." Eric didn't speak. "It would have been easier if she changed her surname," Ove continued. "Maybe." "We had quite a bit to do with her brother, too, but he seems to have turned his life around." Ove trailed off. Perhaps he realized he had gone too far. "Was there anything else?" asked Eric. "Just keep an eye on Hannah," said Ove. "Make sure she's doing okay. And come to me if there are any problems." Eric nodded and walked away. He felt slightly confused by Ove's request. Was it purely down to concern? He sent a message to Hannah telling her the news about Axel, and then he sent a second message to Sapphira this time. "I love you." She replied immediately with a monkey emoji, probably because she thought it was cute. Her parents' visit was going to be stressful for Eric, too. He didn't like how Sapphira was when she was around them. He glanced at the clock. He had to pick up Nyla from the nursery in the next half hour, so he returned to his desk and called Isaac Olin, the teacher who had interrupted the fight between Fanny and Joel. As he listened to the phone ring, he brought up the investigation log. The results of the trace on Joel's phone had just been uploaded into the system. According to the report, it had never left Guardby. What did that mean? That he had been in Guardby when he died? The last day. Through the studio window, Joel can see his mom at the potter's wheel. Sneaking past without her noticing is a piece of cake. She is usually in a world of her own while she's working, and it's hard to get through to her, even when he wants to. That is what Joel loves most about drawing, the way it makes everything else fade away until all that exists is him and the paper. Maybe he should do some drawing now? No, he isn't in the mood. It wouldn't work. The first thing Joel does when he gets inside is to run upstairs and plug in his phone. The second is to roll a joint. He doesn't normally smoke at home, particularly not when Mom is in the studio, but he needs it now to dampen his anxiety. Joel opens the window looking out onto Lena's house and checks that no one is watching before he lights up. He smokes half and then stubs it out and closes the window. He doesn't want to get too high. Can't run the risk of Mom noticing. His anxiety has shrunk to a rumbling pain in the background. Joel has a small Buddha incense holder on his windowsill, and he lights it for a few minutes, carries it around the room to disperse the scent. He then goes down to the kitchen and mixes a glass of chocolate milk, cutting a few thick slices of cheese to put onto some bread. He slumps down onto the sofa and opens Netflix. Joel manages to finish the documentary about the flat earthers and gets halfway through another about the moon landings being faked by the USA. He switches it off as the front door opens. "Oh, you're home already," says Mom. "I'm going over to get Molly now. Could you hide the evidence?" For a split second, Joel thinks she is talking about the joint, but she nods to his empty glass. He wonders whether he should offer to pick up Molly himself, but then he realizes that it would be better if Mom caught Fanny red-handed. Molly has made him swear not to say anything, but he still checks in with her every day after school. On a few occasions, he has asked whether Fanny has been mean again, but she always says no. Joel is pretty sure she isn't telling the truth. "We're going next door for a barbecue tonight, by the way." She means Lena's house. They often go over there for dinner. Their other neighbors are a couple in their 70s. He and Molly walk their golden retriever sometimes and get cookies and milk in return, but they never hang out with them otherwise. "Why?" "It's Gabriel's 40th birthday, so Eureka wanted to throw him a surprise party." "Couldn't you have mentioned it a bit sooner?" Ordinarily, Joel would be thrilled at the prospect of hanging out with Lena, but he doesn't think he has the energy even for her tonight. "I only found out myself a few hours ago. Come on, it'll be nice." Joel mumbles something in reply, and Mom slams the door behind her and disappears. Doubt makes him tremble. Maybe he should forget all about going to the woods tonight. Whatever Fanny has planned is hardly going to end well for him, but if Joel doesn't go, nothing will change. The past week has been awful, and this whole thing with Fanny can, at least, be resolved. He takes his glass and plate to the kitchen and loads them into the dishwasher. He then returns to the sofa, but doesn't switch on the TV. Instead, he closes his eyes and tries to think about nothing at all, but it only half works. How can Fanny be so confident? Joel has no idea who he is or how he should act in this messed up world. Maybe that's why he finds these documentaries so fascinating. So many people who just can't handle the truth, tying themselves into knots to deny the obvious. Joel himself doesn't doubt for a second that the earth is round and that the Americans landed on the moon. The door flies open. "Joel!" Molly cries, running into the room. He can tell from her voice that Fanny hasn't bothered her today, that he can put off talking to her till tomorrow. Maybe he'll be able to straighten out everything with Fanny tonight. "Shoes off!" Mom shouts after her. Molly takes off her shoes and tosses them toward the hallway. "Molly!" Mom protests, but she leaves it at that. She's probably had an okay day, too. Molly slumps onto the sofa beside Joel. "We're having a barbecue tonight and cake because it's Gabriel's birthday." "Cool," says Joel. Molly shakes her head at his lack of enthusiasm. "Want to play Go Fish?" he asks. Molly nods and runs off to get the cards, the ones with the wild animals on them. Mom pops her head into the room and mouths "thank you" to him, but he isn't doing it for her. He needs to distract himself, and that is always easier with Molly around. He isn't a freak in her eyes. After a few rounds, they switch to Carcinone instead. The game was his Christmas present to Molly, but he wrote to everyone on the label so that he didn't have to come up with something to buy Petrie. His stepfather had given him a pair of jeans, but it was Mom who actually picked them out. Molly doesn't care about roads, monasteries, and fields. All she wants is to build cities. To her, making them big and beautiful is more important than winning, and she always tells stories about the people living in them. This time, she starts talking about a wizard named Reuben. "No, actually, it's a witch called Lisa." Petrie gets home, giving Molly a hug and Joel a nod. His eyes seem to linger on Joel's. He must know that he smokes. Joel forces himself to smile, and Petrie heads off into the kitchen to see Mom. Judging by her giggling, it sounds like he must have grabbed her bum. Seems like Petrie had a good day, too. Petrie is much nicer than Axel ever was, but Joel sometimes gets the feeling that Mom has settled for him, that she could find someone better if she wanted to. He barely does anything around the house. Joel once asked her about it, why she doesn't make him do more. "He does lots of things you don't see," she had replied, and then she said that tidying up helps her to think. Joel knows what it's really about. Petrie brings in the money. "Your turn," Molly nudges him, but before Joel has time to draw a new tile, Mom appears from the kitchen. "We're leaving in 15 minutes, so go and get yourselves ready." I am ready," says Joel. "I'm going to wear my cat dress," Molly announces, running up to her room. Everything feels a shade darker without her around. Joel tidies the game away and feels a pang of anxiety at having to sit through an entire dinner with the neighbors, being nice, at whatever Fanny has planned too. Going up to his room and smoking a little more feels incredibly tempting, but he doesn't dare risk it. Lena would notice, and she has already been pestering him for more as it is. He regrets ever letting her try it. because he doesn't like her when she smokes. It makes her angry somehow. It just calms him. Right then, Joel realizes that there is another risk he can't afford to take, showing up to meet Fanny empty-handed. He'll need something to defend himself with.